So this is what I call the Moober keyer. My name's Matt, so I decided to put Uber with Matt. And this is a combination of keyers that I picked up in the industry, combined with my own little tweaks added to this. Now, I want to preface all this by saying one thing. Some compositors are not fans of this type of network when it comes to setting up their keys. One reason being is there's a lot of pipeline here. As you can see, we go down the pipe. And as we do that, it can start to bog down the final result, which could take forever. Now, if you have a fast computer, then you're fine, but it is a heavy network to go all the way through, which eventually occurs regardless when you start to add in CG and so forth. But during the process, you would obviously pre-render out at a certain juncture and move down to avoid the waiting forever for the scene to refresh. Again, the techniques I showed you earlier are usually the preferred kind of basic techniques. The difference with this keyer compared to the other keyers, as you can see here, we have our core despill, edge despill, core matte, edge matte, or you can call it fringe matte. We have our denoise. I have this really cool thing here that we're not going to have in this example of the Uber keyer, is the foot shadows, which I'm going to talk about a little later, where you use the red channel to, if any scene that you have a scene where somebody's feet are actually contacting the green screen floor, you can actually key out their actual shadows. Here's the backdrop coming in. Here's some regrain. The process here, you can see I've added this alpha cleanup pre-copy, and then paint cleanup post-copy here. And the color correction work, here's where we have a hypoth, which is a certain operation to blend the background with the foreground. And then we have our color grading, any transforms we do to our actual object. And then we have our edge extending if needed. Then we have this, which is the big enchilada of this whole thing. We have been fighting back and forth, obviously, with trying to deal with the edges of our character to match with the backdrop. Well, this little network here actually does a great job of using the despill information as a sort of mask to bring in both positive and negative darkening and lightening values based off your background image, and basically color corrects the edge of your actual character. This is really an incredible piece of work. It's been a technique used a lot. Tony Lyons uses it. You can check out, again, I'll link you up to his YouTube channel. I would highly recommend going through all of his training. He is the Uber king, I should say, of keying. Definitely training worth, and it's free, and he's been really cool to kind of put this. This, again, is a little bit more of an extension of a lot of different techniques. And then there's the sharpening, which has a specific workflow, and this is optional right here. There's the G-wrap and the light wrap. Talk about that. Again, this is like a gizmo. And then we have this work for, and this is particular to this scene because this scene is actually Jack. If I go ahead and take a look at the final image here, this is actually Jack looking in front of a sunset here in the backdrop. So this is where an example, and I wanted to show you this, where we can actually go in, isolate out that sun, or the most intense places in that, and create a extra flare, so to speak. Kind of blending in as his face is in front of this, because it's a very bright scene. It's going to do a lot of light wrapping, more intensely than any other area. And then, of course, here is this something that you commonly deal with, which is glints and sparkles, which can be used to simulate sun flares, from which you can go ahead and blur and grade and so forth, and add into the image. Again, I don't have that enabled, but I want you guys to just absorb this stuff and jump into it. And then I also added a context sheet here. So if you see, if I pull this context sheet up, you can see this is just a left and right view, so I can kind of hit H to full frame this, and I could look at any detail that's been lost, or maybe there's still some green in his hair here that I need to kind of isolate and take out. Did I lose, for instance, these whiskers on the side where Jack is? You can see they're kind of carved off here a little bit, so do I have to go back and get that? And again, how's this area working and so forth, and all the little holes and all the little hairs and so forth. What am I losing from the original versus the final output? And then I also have a couple things I've added in here along the lines is this core versus edge analysis. Sometimes it's good to see the overlap of the core versus the edge. And here you can see in this example, I basically shuffled out the core in the red as a red channel, or in red, and here you can see the actual fringe mat in blue, and then they get merged together, and I add an expression to cancel out any areas that are basically it. So obviously when you take blue and red, you make purple. So that's what the overlap is. So if, for example, the core was actually going outside of its area, you would see red out here. And red would mean that's a no-no because the core shouldn't be touching that. And then you got to ask yourself, how far can you allow the core to kind of move in on the fringe mat, which can adjust your erode settings. So it's good to have a visual representation of that as opposed to guessing and going, why is this issue here? Do I have too much blur on my core? Is it overextending itself on top of the fringe mat? Again, these are things that you definitely want to keep in mind as we kind of go through this. So partly this is somewhat set up. I don't want to spend 20 years on this because I'm telling you right now, keying, and one of the reasons why you don't see too many tutorials online of people actually doing keys is specifically for the reason that it just takes a long time to do, and they just don't want to sit here with 20 hours in doing, especially when the shot's moving. So let's go ahead and just go through this basically one step at a time. So again, we're going to start at the top and move to the bottom and go through the whole process. So obviously we start with the actual green screen footage. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. You guys have seen this before. I'm going to go ahead and choose a frame that is particularly interesting to this shot. So I'm going to choose frame 26. And I'm going to strip this down and go back through it. So let's go down the pipe this way. Obviously this moves over to if there is any ground shadows. We'll get into that in a minute. But here we have Jack, and we're going to come over here. We're going to create a couple channels here. So the first one is we're adding a channel that is, you can see, just go ahead and throw it in here. We're adding a channel. This here is a copy. So what we're doing is we're copying the RGBA red information, right, we're looking at here, into something called GS, red, GS, green, GS, blue. So you can kind of look at this as your original. So if I put my viewer to the copy node here, you can see we have this GS, which is just the original, because later down the pipe you might just want to, instead of putting your viewer back and forth, you can switch between this and your RGB and see the difference of progression as opposed to putting your viewer into two inputs like the original and back. So it's just basically copying an extra copy of this off to the side for you. Next we have this here, which copies the red, green, blue information into a new channel called GS Reduce. Okay, so that's another channel that's been sort of, the information's been copied into that. So again, if we put our viewer here, you can see we have GS, right, which is the same plate, and we have GS Reduce, which is the same exact thing. Okay, so newly created channels in this whole process. So moving down here, we're going to talk about the edge despill and the core despill here in a minute, but let's talk about the denoise. As I talked about before, professionals will have to use neat video. So instead of this denoise here, you'll actually have neat video, and neat video will be in a switcher node. You'll actually, the first thing you do as you start to do your keys is you'll basically pre-render your footage in the form of EXR or DPX out into using the very computationally expensive neat video plugin, which will do a nice job of kind of taking out the grain and noise, but in the process keep it sharp. In our case, we don't have that plugin. It's $300. Go spend it. It's the best money you ever did. I'm planning on investing in it very soon. Usually I just let the studio pay for it, obviously. But you can see if I just kind of look through the denoise here and just double click it, I'm sampling this area. I could sample another area. Let's just see the difference here. You can see the granularity clean up there. Okay. So this gets written out, and you can write out this as well if you want, and then you just take the write node and turn it into a read node by clicking here, and it'll feed in wherever you saved off your file at. So then you just hit this switcher node, switch them from 0 to 1, right? So now you're not waiting for the neat video to calculate every frame. You have it pre-rendered off, which is very, very important. So usually you will always render off a version with just the degrained version for the sake of speeding up things. Okay, so let's talk about kind of moving down the pipe here. Let's talk about, say, well, we can jump into the core mat, shall we? Now, you can come in here, especially in the core mat, and get away with using the screen clean. I talked about that before, so I can go ahead and click on the screen clean, and I'll go ahead and turn it off and on. And honestly, I mean, it's affecting these areas up here, brighten these up, because this is the tricky area up here, because this area is very, 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 very dark up here, especially with the fact that there's a silhouette naturally occurring. So I can come over here and click this color and sample this area here, and you can see it's brightening up this area of the screen. It's trying to universally blend or kind of diffuse out the actual green screen. It is a synthetic process which is affecting the edges, by the way, in a negative way. So you can see it's adding a little bit of a line there. See that line? It wasn't there before, now it is, and we're losing this nice juicy motion blur. This is when, like I talked about before, tampering in God's domain, you're fiddling around. Now this is actually a hole here, seeing through, and here. These are going to be the problem areas that we're going to have to deal with, but we have to respect that they have to be keyed out. So you can't just blow these things off and say whatever, and I'm not going to key that out. I'll just let it blend into the background and color it black or something. You can't do that kind of stuff. Our biggest challenge is just looking off the bat. Of course, will be these highlights. These are going to be a big issue. Jack's reflection on these specific goggles, the actual reflection of the goggles will be an issue. The more reflective anything is on a character, the worse off you are. The darker the stuff is, the better. The brighter or whiter this stuff is, the more reflective, the more chance you're going to get spill, the more you're going to have to deal with those areas. So I went ahead and used the screen clean in this circumstance because I'm not worried about having a perfect edge on my character, by the way. This is going to be the very nasty core mat, which is very crunchy and very sharp. It doesn't have a fall off. We don't even have to worry about respecting motion blur when it comes to this. So I'm going to go over here and jump to my Primat, and I'll go ahead and put my viewer to the Primat node here. And you know what, I'm going to throw these nodes out and just make them fresh. Now, if you are using the education version of this, you don't want to use Primat, I would definitely use Keylight. So if I was doing a Keylight version of this, and I'll show it to you because some of you guys are using the non-commercial version of Nuke, which does not include Primat. So the Keylight, I can come over here and just click my screen color, right? Click here, hit A for alpha, ramp up screen gain just a hair, go to my screen matte, clip the whites, or clip the blacks, clip the whites back really strong, really close. And then if I need to, don't do much dilation. Dilation is dangerous. You could also do a screen softening if you want, just to give it a little bit of a soft edge. Slam your gamma, make sure there is no Swiss cheese holes. As you can see, there is Swiss cheese holes in this case. Can you fix that by, bringing back the white? Even bringing it so close as to hair is still not solving the issue, right? So you can see if I just take my screen white, I can drag this back until the holes are filled, but then there comes a point where I can't deal with these reflections, right? The clip black, cleared itself up pretty well, right? So here is the difference, as you can see, and you can go with that. Now, to fill in these Swiss cheese holes, if I go ahead and take a look, and just go ahead and sample these areas. Oops, let me go ahead and jump over here and close this and just sample these areas here. You can see the value is 0.95. So it's still, it's not a, it's still something you got to take care of, right? So again, you can do paintbrush work, or in this case, we can do a grade, and we can set this grade to alpha. And I can go ahead here, and let's take a look here. So I'll put this back here. So we still have these transparent issues here. And actually, let's not use a grade. Let's use an erode filter. And again, I'm just going to allow this to dilate by, I could just use a dilate, but I'm going to use a erode fast because the opposite direction is a dilate. So if I take a look now, you can see it's dilating it in. Alright, so here's the original, here's the new one. If I go ahead and play around a little bit, you can see that I can dilate this in very easily. Now, as you dilate, this is danger zone because you can create webbing in doing this. And what I mean by that is it's going to start merging these edges together. Take a look. You can see this is starting to merge this to this. And this, if you apply or put your edge mat on this, you can create webbing or areas here that are being used out. So roads are tricky, and you got to be very, very careful with these guys. I would actually maybe do a animated roto there on those highlights. -10 is pretty intense, like I said. So if I come over here, I'll just put it at -10 just so you can get an idea. And then from there, I would do another erode, and this time pull it back. So again, I'll put this. So if this is -10.5, I'll put this into value. Let's go to 10.5 or something. Let's go to let's go to 10.5 in the opposite direction, right? So here's the push out. Here's the shrink back. Let's see the difference between the two, right? See how there's a little bit of a change in that this is coming. There's a little bit of a difference on the edge here. Not too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and pull it in even more. And then I can also come in here and just add this feather or something. So you can have it a feather, or if you wish, you can use the blur. This is the feather that, again, I'll put this to 0 here. And we'll try to play with. I'm going to pull this back out. There we go. So I can this amount of feather can be in the positive or the negative direction. So if you feel that you want to go back or forward, you can. So we're going to push it forward a little bit. And that for now is our core. Now we still have this nonsense up here, which if we go back to our key light and crush our blacks a little bit, we'll probably clean that out pretty good. There we go. So that's a good, nice core for the alternative key light. We're not doing that. We're going to use Primat, which is, again, the favorite because Primat will handle with those Swiss cheese holes a lot better and not have us do a lot of dilation. I think the big reason why using a core for Primat as opposed to key light is to avoid the need to dilate out and then erode back in. I don't know, that's what I assume. So I'm going to go to the Primat here. And let's go ahead and go back to RGB. I'm going to go ahead and sample the background. Here we go. And let's go to put our viewer to that. Oops. Let's first select our, sorry, let me erase that. I'm going to go ahead and make another one. I had it under the wrong option here. Smart Select. Click, Shift, Control, Alt, and just click and put your viewer to it. There we go. So again, you can hold down Shift, Control, Alt, try to find a middle ground here. As you can see, this is going to be a problem area up here. So lasso grabbing, see if you can pull that out a little bit. If you come up here, you can see if we grab this area around the hair, it might be a better bet even though you're not getting everything. I don't know, it's very difficult to kind of deal with those areas up there in the darkness. So with the Primat, we say select background noise, and then we hold down, again, Shift, Control, Alt, and lasso grab. And that allows us to grab all these areas here, like that. And then, of course, you're going to slam your gamma, but I'm going to do that. And you can see, well, first off, let me go ahead and get up here. I've got to get some of this stuff up here, by the way. And grab this area and just gobble gobble. Okay, so now we're going to slam our gamma, and now we're going to be very careful when we do this. We're actually going to jump over to our foreground noise, and I'm just going to click little areas first. I'm not going to do the whole process where people like to come in here and they like to shift and grab and lasso grab. So if you go like that, I'm going to see if I can get away with this by just grabbing and maybe lasso grabbing just a couple of little areas here, because the more we fiddle with this, you're going to notice stuff's going to appear. Like if I lasso grab everything, watch, like, all right, I got it all, right? Holding up pretty well. Let's go ahead and see our final. You can see we're starting to introduce something back there. So again, this is a three-dimensional keeler, clean background noise, and then go back and see, is this something that I want to grab? Yeah, I think I'm going to grab it. So I'm going to go clean background noise. See if I can grab some of that. The more you do this, the more goofier your edge is going to get. You're going to get these fragments of pieces that stick out. So you got to be careful when you do this. Again, go back to your original footage and just look, like, should I get rid of that background noise? Yeah. When in doubt, erase into the edge if you feel that you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and grab as much as I can. I'm going to look around, slam the gamma, right? Looking good. So we want to make sure we got all that noise out of there, and we're good to go. So looking pretty good. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grade this. This case, I went ahead and just, I don't think in this case I need to grade blacks any more than they are, so I think I'll leave that at 0. And then if you have the gradient here, you can play with the gamma. Again, you can see I have this set to alpha. So I can, the gamma is good at kind of shrinking the matte in a little bit, but it does, as you can see here, sharpen it. So be aware of that. And some people will clamp the white and play with the multiply a little bit to extend it out. So it's up to you. There we go. All right, so do you need to, in this case, dilate out, which is a -1 on filter erode? No, we don't. Okay, so that's the benefit of that. So we don't have to, we're not messing with the edge, melting the edge together and then receding it back via a dilate erode. We're just eroding. So I'm going to come to this erode here, and this is where we're going to decide to punch it back. So I'm going to choose about 10 units back here throughout this, and then add a feather to this. So you can see there's the feather, and it's a negative feather going in. Again, the gamma will adjust the extension of the feather. Another great tool. Now, one of the other things you'll notice in here, if I do the feather, we've got some information here. If I go ahead and see if I can sample these areas here, you can see we're getting values. Yeah, we're getting holes. Okay, so what's going on there? Well, there might be, let's go ahead and just poke around here. There might still be holes in here. Oh, there is. Because if we dilate it, that's when we're going to start to see something, right? So by shrinking it down, this is what we've done, we've exposed these holes. So again, what can I do? Well, I mean, you can go back to your Primat and choose foreground noise and just try to isolate these areas if you can. And it doesn't look like it's doing it too well. Again, I'll come back to my Primat here. See if I can grab as much as I can. And let's see if that solved it. Alright, so we got this, and then we got the feather. Let's turn the feather off there. It seems, let's take a look here. Got that, we got this. So this is the tricky part, and then you might, like I said, you might need to come in here, add a filter erode set to just a -1 value to dilate. You can also use a dilate here, and that's going to clean up the little dots, as you can see here. So just kind of blowing it out to kind of melt in all the little holes, okay, and then finally shrinking it back in will be good. So there is our core. I want you to notice this interesting little offshoot I have here. I have the core, moving in and going here, but when it comes to my actual mat, which I'm building over here, I've got this extra little stencil here. So the stencil is going to be used for these areas right here that obviously got, as you can see, chewed away. We knew there was an empty hole there, so if I go ahead and take a look at my stencil, I've added these a couple holes to where I know there is actual real holes. So let's go ahead and take a look. We don't want the core to fill those up. So those are these little holes right here that I've added. And the reason, as we're getting to this is going to be, this core mat is what's going to be used as the feathering between the core despill and the edge despill. But I don't want this stencil to be included in it because it'll basically give me weird results, and I don't want that. So I'm not too worried about that in that respect. Okay, so the next step is shuffling this information to the alpha channel to the RGB channel. And one of the reasons by doing this is by staying in RGB, I can swap very quickly back and forth to my original, just so I can switch back and forth. I don't have to go up here and go, okay, turn it to alpha. You know, that's one of the reasons why we kind of jump into RGB mode. Okay, so let's talk about the actual edge mat. In this edge mat, I find that a lot of artists will try to, as best as they can, avoid the screen clean if they don't need it. But if you do need it, you can actually use it the best you can. Another cool thing you can do is you can actually use the screen clean and actually do a dissolve between the original and this if you wish, which is kind of cool. And you can get you can get a little bit of what the benefits are of the screen clean here, but we're not going to do that for the edge matte. So I went ahead and did a whole daisy chain version of this, and I found in the process that it actually didn't help my situation. And daisy chaining the actual IBK colors can be beneficial for areas like this, okay? But here's the problem. This is so dark here, right, that if I did get a little sample of this, it would sample a darker color and not get me a good result, okay? So that's why I stuck with a single IBK color here, as opposed to a daisy chain. You can see the results if you wish. I have it here. I have the two different options. Later on we're going to talk about why this edge matte has this weird system here. That way I don't have to literally build and copy paste this color node. This is connected. These darks and lights are connected to every one of these darks and lights nodes. So whatever input I put into my master is actually plugged into these, and it propagates down. So we're going to deal with this later on and use this later on, so don't worry about it. But you can see I just gave up on that and came over here and used the IBK color, from which in this circumstance I did a 5.5, 0.07 on the reds, 0.03, and I got a good result. Again, you can cross compare the two as if does it look like Jack got out of the way. It does. Look at the color there. It matches pretty well. You can see here this is if Jack got out of the way. And then look at the color luminance. It's the same, right? Very, very well done. These are going to be a fun issue right here, as you can see, green reflecting in the eyes. So with that said, we can go ahead and take a look, and I graded it. So I did a little bit of grading in here to the image. So let me go ahead and just show you what that looks like. So here is the information. You can see we are losing information in the extreme highlights here and the areas where there's green. I went ahead and graded the image as you can see here. Now the question is, did we lose any information in the grade? I didn't do much of a black point grade change here, 0.01. But you can see we did maybe lose a little bit of information, but not a lot. And then the white point, I always like to take it and bring it to like 0.98 or 0.99 to help fill in those Swiss cheese holes. You can see if I look at this, I mean the core is supposed to fill in the holes, but if I take a look at this and bring it all the way down, you can see, look at all of this area that's been kind of taken out. But if I just do a simple grade of just two values here, right, of crushing the white values, you can see it did a lot. It filled in a lot of those issues. Okay, we still have this here, and I don't want to overcrank it anymore, so I'm going to leave that to the core matte to deal with. So with that, I've also added a key light. And again, this is whatever suits your fancy, right? So if you go to the key light off the side, I've made a key here, right? And then I've added a roto here for this side over here in the key mix, because I found that regardless of how hard I try with the IBK color, the key mix actually did a better job of actually keeping the information the best that I want it, including dealing with these little holes over here. So you can see here I wanted to maintain these holes, so I just did a key light. Again, the key light is simply dealing with the color, bringing up the gain a little bit, crushing the blacks just a hair. This might be a little bit too much actually. I pull that back, and then a little bit of softening if I want. Not a good idea, but I'll just maybe put a little bit in there. Not much, and that gets that area is added in here so this area was done by the key light, this area was done by the IPK gizmo. Again, go with what works. Don't trust in what someone says, oh, always use this, And then I shuffle out again the actually RGBA here. Now here's the cool little plugin I talked about earlier, the core versus edge analysis. This is where I can we basically take the core and plug it into the red channel, and then we do the edge matte or fringe matte into the blue channel. We merge them together. Now you'll notice we're getting some very interesting artifacts here. So I've added an expression here which basically says if If red is greater than blue, then make red blue. The value of blue to red. So that's basically a numeric value. And what that does is it cleans up all that information. So this is a nice visual representation to show you what exactly is the core mat and what exactly is the fringe mat, and and what does it combine. So the combination of both is purple. The area here, for instance, that is blue is considered to be your fringe mat. And if for some reason, what I would do is I would even play this through and see if you have any issues where you see red. If you see red, that means the core has spilled on over, and I can show that to you if I come over here to my filter erode here, right? And here's where we erode. If I go ahead and turn that off, actually let's leave it on. This is 10.5. Let me go ahead and take that, pull it out even more, right? See if we can kind of pull that out. There we go. And I'll go ahead and disable my expression really quick. You can see that the problem we have here is this area. Again, you can just use the merge or the expression. At the merge node, you can see if it's gone overboard or out. The expression has gone out. So the red means the core is like almost like a warning sign. Red meaning bad, bad, bad. It is what it is. So again, I'll come back to my filter erode, bring this back until I'm comfortable with where it's at. Again, I'll look at this with the expression this time. And you can see it's comfortably away. Now you want to stay away from motion blur areas. So there might be an area when his face turns very dramatically, and this is going to be too close for comfort in regards to allowing the core to be there, because it'll create this cutoff in the motion blur. It'll look really weird. So this is a great chance for you to just take a look and play through and see if there's an issue. Over here, under here is where we screen together the core mat and the edge mat. So this is the combination of both worlds. So we get all those nice juicy details. He is really out of focus. Again, we come up here, we can sample this here, and we can see the values are still below 0.05. So it's okay to have that information there. Now here's where we deal with the garbage mask, which is a combo of two different types of garbage masks. So the way this works is rather interesting. The first thing you can see, and we're moving down the pipe, is just a regular roto that you would animate, which is this. So if I go to this roto, we've animated this sort of roto mask around our character, right? And again, if we come to the blur, we've blurred it a little bit, right? I can blur it even more if I want, just to kind of give it a nice strong edge. Now the mask, it's just masking it out, so you can see what it's doing. It's cutting off this information here. So the good news about that is that this mask is being plugged in to mask out this from the core. Okay, so now we're taking the core. Here's the core information coming down the pipe, right? And coming to the garbage mask. And now I can go ahead and take that, and it's dilated, okay, which is pumped out very heavily. It's blurred. And then it's used as a mask input for this. So this is now the mask that's used to mask out this. So let's go ahead and see what happens at that stage. So I disable and re-enable. You can see it's isolated itself to a moving dilation based on an offshoot or extension out of the original mat itself. You might want to increase this even bigger, so you might want to dilate this even more. You can see if it starts to get too close onto your object, you don't want that, so you might have to extend this out pretty heavily so that it doesn't touch anything here. So you can see, and always just double check, because this might be causing issues here. You'll notice the version we chose for this is not the one with the stencil chopped out, so keep that, be aware of that. So in that case, let's go ahead before we continue on. Down here would be the combined mats, everything looking beautiful, all right? And then, of course, the core mat minus this stencil process is being brought into the thing we showed you earlier, which is the exponential blur, which is the mask between the core despill and the edge despill. So let's go ahead and jump into those two. So here's the core despill, and again, I have your, the top hits of top favorites: expression, key light, kill spill, and of course, there's also despill madness and so forth. I might show you guys D-Spill Madness. I do have it. I just don't want to show it because it won't load up into your expression unless you have it installed. So here's the expression, the atypical expression that is the favorite before. And again, the big difference between the core D-Spill and the edge D-Spill is we don't add back the luminance information for the object, for the green information that was lost, only in the edge D-Spill. Because the edge D-Spill, I'm sorry, the core D-Spill is all about maintaining the skin tones and the luminance values, whereas the edge D-Spill we can go crazy with and, not add back the luminance information, but just, try to match the foreground to the background. That's the whole point. So the core D-Spill is pretty straightforward. You can see this is the skin tones, and I'm only worried about the interior of Jack here. So if I take a look at it, I'll go to this hue correct, and I've added this little mask here, which I'm not sure might have been under a different frame. But if you take a look at his skin, do you see anything that might need some work, like maybe underneath his actual eye, this area right here might be a little bit too green or something. Could be yellow, but you can sit here and maybe I need to kind of pump out some green. So here I added the hue correct and did some green suppression there. And how much do you want? You take too much out, you're gonna move away from the yellow, the golden orange yellow, right? But if you feel that there is some green tinge in there, which you can see here there is, you can dial this just before it kind of loses its green complexity here. And then of course we do the minus here. So there it is. And here is, again, this is only for the core, desaturate it. And you can see we plus it back in. So now we have maintained the original luminance of the character. So if I go before the core D-Spill and here at the finish, and I zoom up on his face and I hit the letter Y to go into luminance mode, you can see there hasn't been any change in luminance information. This is basically keeping the skin tones. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and jump over to the rough and tumble edge D-Spill area where we're going to play around. So I use that wonderful expression again, which kind of gets me started. Again, you could use key light if you wish. You can see I've also done a key light for a specific area, and I wanted to get that sort of nice orange complexion there. And I've key mixed it in here, and in this case my mask is over here. So the question is, what is this being used for? Well, I found that his actual chin here, and again, when you're dealing with the edge D-Spill, you're worried about the edges. You're not really worried about the interior of the character. And you can see he's got this weird green like thing going on with his chin. Okay, so this has a lot to do also with the expression. But if I come in here with the alternative, and this would have to be tracked in here, you can see I can kind of get away with dealing with this here. It's going to be very tricky. Again, I can come to my key light and just play around. The key light, I can change my alpha bias up a little bit. Start to pull out that green before it turns into reddish purple. It's going to be very tricky. I can also use a hue correct node, so that's what I did here, and I've isolated it to this area right here on his face. So again, I might want to pull this out. This was probably a different frame that I used through the process here, but you can see what we're doing. You're doing spot checking on here, and you're gonna have to track this stuff in, maybe track a portion of his face, or if his face is moving fast enough, you just be very careful with your animation so you don't get swimming of changes of color correction along the edges of his face. And then of course we minus this information out to show us the areas that are going to need color correction. We add this expression here, which basically clamps the max values of RGB just to be safe, and that gets copied into the D-Spill channel that we created earlier. Remember, we created this channel for D-Spill, so if I put my viewer to this and take a look to my D-Spill, we flooded this R information because we only need one channel to do this. And this information is the area that has been despilled, or the green area. This will be used later as a mask to add in the areas where we want to blend in the background. Now, you got to be careful with that because you can literally, if we put the sun behind Jack, and we did this with the process I'm going to show you later down the chain, you would actually see an actual sun, the edge of the sun here in his face, so you might have to blur the image a little bit. It's a way to marriage both the background plate and the foreground plate and the background image that you're going to be putting onto this, or the back plate, or the backing region, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over back to RGBA here. So we have our work done. And of course, I have this filter erode. Let me just show you. This is the core. Go back here. This is the core minus the stencil. And I do an exponential blur and blur it, which is a logarithmic blur here. Key mix it in, and what you get is this. We've maintained the original. You can see the color correction break going on here. The original luminance values here, and at the same time, we managed to pull that green out of his beard, which is along the edge. So we have a good despill. But it's not perfect in as far as matching the background. The background is all red, and this is white and bright. So what are we going to do about that? Well, the next process, and I'm going to go into a further tutorial about how we can use this thing called the Alpha Paint Cleanup, and this is where we can use Roto Paint tools. I'm going to disable this for now because we're not using it. But if you did have an area where Jack was moving across a actual piece of like a black line or something in there that was keyed, like maybe like a black mark on the green screen behind him, you can actually come in here and paint the alpha out. If that doesn't work and the actual image is too embedded into the color information, you can go past the copy information where we take the RGB information and marriage it to the new alpha fringe matte, or the matte itself, final matte. And you can use an RGB based Roto Paint node here, or RGBA work, which not only will paint the red, green, blue, but the alpha information to paint out that little mark, or black mark that might be pushing into his actual skin. I'm going to do this with the demonstration of Sterling as he runs across the green screen, so don't worry about it. We're going to get into that. Then comes the process of your color correction. Now, most compositors will use this technique I kind of talked about before, which is if you kind of hover over it, this is called a hypodiagonal square root. And what that does is it takes, what you do is you take a constant, just throw a constant in here, right? And you color correct, you just grab, like sort of the darks of your actual background plate. So if I go ahead and let's go all the way up here to the sun here, right? So here's this sun shot. Let me go to the final image that we're going to be compositing. I can come in here to this constant color, click on here, and maybe just sample something like that, right? So I get this kind of pukey kind of brown. And if I go ahead and merge it, you can see it's pretty dramatic, right? It's only affecting, it's staying away from the highlights, but it's basically affecting or being added into the actual shadow areas. So how crazy can you get with this? Well, the grade node, you can come in here and start to crush this away with the black point and then slowly introduce it. So you're getting this sort of coloring into the actual shadow areas. So besides adjusting your blacks and whites, and color grading via a grade after this helps tremendously in kind of blending to the background. If you have a transform, here's where the time to do it. So you could add a transform, you want to move Jack forward or backward, we can do that. Now comes the edge extension. These are just examples, you need them, and they're not particular to this example, but you can see how we can have certain areas, and I did this in the last lesson, how you can do edge extension per area if you wish. I have this other general overall edge extension. Okay, this is like a sort of a per area work. You can do multiple edge extensions, by the way. And this is a nice little test setup that I did for him. So let me go ahead and just show you how this works. I'm going to come over here to the finished product here. And if we take a look, I'll do the pre-mult test so you can see it. So this is just basically pre-mults. This is just a pre-multiplication. This is the same thing I showed you in the last lesson, except this is really cool. I've done a little bit of color correction work on the line. So if I put the smear line in here, this green area is defining the edge that is actually going to smear. So I can visually have I could have a visual representation of what's going to smear outward in the normal direction. So you can see here, I can see that this is going to smear out. Where am I going to have issues? Around sharp corners here, where you have like V-shaped corners. Those are the areas that are going to get fishy because this mustache is going to come down and maybe blend into the actual bottom lip, which might make no sense. Why would the bottom lip be actually brown? So let's go ahead and see how that works. I'll turn it off and on. And let's see here. Actually, I'll just put this to pre-mult and I'll turn it off and on. So you can see what it's done. It's extended it out, but this still doesn't solve the problem of the edge. It does a halfway decent job, and I've done it extremely conservatively here. You can see these are very small numbers, right? It's given us a slight blur along the edges. It's done a little bit in fixing this gradient here that would be motion blur or depth of field blur. And here this might be a little bit overboard because we're starting to get into blurry land, right? It's a little bit too blurry. So again, I can probably clean this up a little bit more. I can extend it even more if I want. The pre-blur amount, I can increase that, but as I do that, I'm going to start to get a streaky, blurry edge. So let's see if we can kind of, let's see, pull this, just play around a little bit, add some splices. See if we can kind of get that going. There we go. So yeah, you can see how this is basically something that we can either use or not use. It's going to be very difficult to deal with. So again, the question is maybe we should just not use it at all. So I can go ahead and turn that off. We still have our silhouette of a white line around Jack. You can see it over here and here. And you can say to yourself, well, what do I do? I mean, I don't want that. And, I tried to fix it, say, over here in the core despill, or in the edge despill, and I talked about how taking a bright, obviously when you shoot in front of a green screen and your actor's in front of a green screen, the background image of the green screen, because it's the green channel, is going to be very bright. So to color correct the edge despill, okay, to have a darker background can introduce a lot of noise values along the edge. So it's very difficult to do this, right? And you're animating rotos to match up with the face. Well, one way of really taking care of that problem is this real cool background despill edge blending. And what this is going to use, what you don't realize, is coming down the pipe, if I put my viewer here, coming down the pipe is the wonderful despill information. And this is the information that is the edge, right? You can see it. We're going to use this as a transparency to bring in the background image to brighten up where it needs to be bright and darken up where it needs to be dark. So that is a pretty monumental task, but this actually takes care of it. So let's look what's coming down the pipeline here. So we have our actual sun here, right? Let's go back to RGB here. There we go. And make sure I'm in RGBA. So here's the sun. We grade it, we reformat it, we add another gradient, we defocus it like crazy because I think Jack was shot with a 2.0 f-stop, so that should be a very blurry background if we're considering the rules of deep focus and all types of realities of bokeh and all that. So again, there's better plugins and so forth for that. So here is the background image, and that goes in, and I decided to blur it a little bit. You don't have to blur it, by the way, but I like to blur it just a little bit. In fact, that's a little bit too much. I'm going to blur it even more, 14. And then I'm going to go over here, and there's this thing called the grade. So you can see what this is. I'm grading this information, and you can see this grade specifically has black clamp and white clamp turned off. Okay, very important. Because we want positive and values outside of normalized range of 0 to 1. So if I put my viewer here, the dark areas you can see have a negative value, and the bright areas have an over positive value, so they're above 1. That's what you want. That's definitely what you want. And by fiddling with the black point and the white point, you can do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump over here to the multiplier. And I have an additional one over here just in case. So you have this, in case this gets screwed up, you can just take this and throw one in there. You can see all it is a unclamped, a black clamp, white clamp. So actually, why don't we go ahead and just pop that baby out. And let's go ahead and just take this guy and pop him in. So we're getting a fresh start, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at the values here. The darks are not in a negative value, and the brights are not really in a positive value. They're coming close to 1. Blue has a positive value or a value greater than 1. So these values should be greater than 1, and the dark areas should be actually negative. So the way you do that is by fiddling with the black points and the white points with black clamp and white clamp turned off, because this is what's going to drive the darkening and the brightening of the edge. Now, a lot of what you see here is like what I call unnecessary. There's a little area here where it says you might want to desaturate the D-spill to avoid unnatural colors. I get that, and then you can desaturate that from your plate or whatever. But you can see here, this is basically kind of working in tandem with this. But here's where we actually, this is where we shuffle out the actual D-spill information. And then we remove all the channels just to save ourselves the calculations going down here, so you can see there is no real extra channels. And then we grade it. You can see here, you can do, if you want to, you can adjust the D-spill amount necessary. Gets shuffled again. There's some grading additional, and then you can desaturate it. So what this is doing is taking this area in the white that would be obviously the areas of the D-spill. I can come over here with the desaturation here, and it's set to 0. So you can see it's desaturating these areas, and when you desaturate these areas, okay, it'll work better with this plus here, which will involve the actual blending into the background image along the edges. So it's recommended, but not always needed, to desaturate as much as you can around those areas. Okay, so finally let's get down to this, which just basically is moving down this pipeline. So just imagine this, ignore all this here, just imagine this is coming down the pipeline, this is by itself, right? So you can see here, this gets multiplied upon this, right? So here is your actual information, which is your D-spill, gets multiplied by the image that you've color corrected here. And because this is dealing with positive values, you're not going to really see a visual representation of what's going on to a certain degree. And then that gets shuffled to your RGBA, and then this gets plussed over. So as of right now, this may look a little confusing, right? But it is what it is. It's actually blending the edges in. So I really don't want to look at this over here. I don't want to look at the backing region. I want to actually try to concentrate on, say, let's start right here, right by the chin. And at this point, I can go into my grade here, and as you can see, if I start playing with the black point, you see how as I increase the black point, it's flooding the information of into the actual edge. Isn't that awesome? If I go too overboard, I get these nasty oversaturated colors. So I'm basically just introducing a little bit in there, okay, like that. And then I have my white point, which if I come over here to my these values here, right? If I push that, see how the brightness is going into his mustache? I'm going to bring that in just a little bit. So let's take a look at this plus with and without the color correction. Now we may went a little bit overboard, but let's face it, when you're dealing with very bright backgrounds, they do flood over and actually spill and kind of push over the edge here. That's just the way it is. So if you take a look at this plus, okay, versus the original plate shot, it's getting pretty close, right? Let's see how we're dealing with those pocket holes over here. So let's go ahead and just take a look. So I'll go ahead and jump over here. And let's go ahead and take a look. So I'll go over here to the final plus here. And it's not grabbing a hold of these areas. Now why? Well, if we come to our grade node, you can see why that is, right? Now the reason being is it's basically masking. There should be little white areas here. So why is that the case? Well, probably has to do with something we maybe did. Let's go ahead and go all the way back here to our edge mat. So we do have holes here, but they're so small, as you can see. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how we're going to fiddle with these. We're going to deal with these. We can see the alpha edge. It's barely there, and that is the reality, and that came forth in the D-spill. Remember, the information was printed here, right? if we take a look at the D-spill, let's go ahead and take a look at it. This is it, right? So here it is, right? This is the information, if we're taking a look at it, right? This is what's been defined as quote-unquote the D-spill. And when we get over here, come all the way down the pipeline and we shuffle it out, there it is. So there's the D-spill. The reason why is something happened to those holes somewhere in the pipeline. And again, this is where we can kind of backpedal and find out. So I'm going to go ahead and backpedal. I've got this set to D-spill. And somewhere down the pipe, this actually got blended together. So I'm going to move back, keep moving down the pipeline. This is very common kind of like diagnostic work. Go to the copy node, and then I come to the key mix node. And now if I come back to the edge D-spill, this is where we built it. Oh, look, there it is. What happened? Well, go to the key mix. The key mix is set to key mix all channels. We do not want to do that. We just want to have it affect the RGBA. So now we are maintaining, down the pipe here, those holes, right? So now when we come to this merge, right, let me jump back to my RGBA. Now those holes are actually being affected. Not by much, but they are being affected, right? Now, the question is, can you come in here and do an isolated grade, like we could maybe do another grade here, make sure we have black and white clamped off, and I can do a roto for this area here, and what if we isolate to these areas here? So I'm being real sloppy here, but I just want to show you. And I can come over here and push these areas. See that? I can push those areas more intensely, right? Just kind of fiddle with it, and obviously add a blur. So add a blur to this. There we go. And just blur that edge a little bit. Now obviously that's a little nasty, but again, you can see how this is basically taking care of all of our problems almost. We still have an edge blur, which I usually only put maybe 2 or 1 pixels on, and not too much. But look at that. Look at the pre-multiplied reality now. We've got all those beautiful edges in there matching the background. It's incredible. Okay, so the sharpening. Let's talk about sharpening in here. And again, if you're a little bit confused by this, don't be surprised. I'm going to go through it again in another demo, so don't freak out. So let's talk about sharpening. So here's sharpening. Now we are currently in the pre-multiplied position, right? So what we have to do is you don't want to just sharpen the image. You don't want to unpre-multiply it, sharpen it, and then pre-multiply it, because you're going to get weird artifacts. So one way to get the image sharper through the degradation of the non-existent concatenation during the process here, because you can see if I put my viewer here and I go back to the original plate, which we should always do, we have lost some quality, very little, but the image has been slightly blurred in all this work. Okay, so we need to maybe bring him back, or maybe the character's out of focus or something, and we need to do our best. Again, we're tampering in God's domain. We are not allowed to get too goofy with this. So what this does is it dilates the edge in a little bit. So I have a dilation, let's see, put this dilation set to -6, which is basically an erode. It erodes it in, blurs the edge, and in this case we sharpen it with this based off of a mask. So the whole image gets sharpened. You can see if we kind of look the viewer here. This sharpen is, I don't think there's any sharpening in here. Let's see if I can take a look. I think there's a little bit of sharpening. Yeah, just a hair. So you can increase this, but obviously the more you increase sharpening, the more, due to the matrix that you'll get these black edges along here, right, which can cause weird artifacts. So let's put this maybe up to 2 pixels if we feel it. I only think we need 1 pixel for this because Jake's pretty well established. So this basically is kind of a retreatment of the original footage here, just by sharpening out just a touch. If you need to, doesn't matter. But it doesn't sharpen the outer edges. So there's no sharpening happening out here. Let's go ahead and just show you. Put my viewer here. There's no sharpening out here, but there is sharpening going on in the center. Okay, so now that we've done that, we add a G-wrap. What the heck is a G-wrap? Well, this is a plugin / thing you can get off of Nukepedia. I'm going to go into a further example of this later, but color bleeding, again, it's using the background file, so you can see it's feeding this background input that's coming down the pipe into the background. And we have this set to a mix of such a low value, but it gives it a nice little touch. It kind of washes the background. I'm going to do a demo of this later, but it washes the background over the foreground. It does a little bit of color bleeding. You can do a whole bunch of it if you want. Again, let me take the mix and bring it up really high. So you can do that. Then there's an overall wrap, and then there's an isolated luminance-based wrap. Again, I think I'm going to go over this later on. I want to do a whole little tutorial on this because we're already at the hour mark here for this video. The light wrap is just your atypical light wrap. We've talked about the light wraps before if you haven't seen a demo of them. All they do is, again, I'm going to do this whole area, I'll do a whole demo so you guys don't have to freak out. So it basically creates the areas that are obviously in the real world when you are behind the sun. Someone takes a photograph of you and the sun is basically on your cheek. In this case, same thing with Jack. The light will wrap more around your object. Dark areas will not wrap around your face more. It's just photographically the way it is. So this takes this information, obviously, and pluses it over. So we can go ahead and take a look, and it's increased a little bit more information here. You don't want to go too overboard with this. I usually keep it very low. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about these pieces. These are extra bits. They're not necessary, but they help in the comp. So what this is, it's a luminance-based system here where we're keying the luminance information. So you can see here, I just pulled back the information and grabbed the sun. I've eroded it. I've graded it, blurred it, graded again. I've created a stencil here based on a blur of the original. So the original matte is stenciling out. So you can see this is his nose. And I had two different types of blurs which are screened together. So you can see you have the outer halo here and then the inner glow. You can change these up if you prefer. So you can have one that maybe is a little bit more intense, and this blur here, kind of blur that up. That gets screened together, brought back into the alpha, and you can see here we grade it, pre-multiply it, blur it, and finally we use what's called the atop. So what does the atop do? If you look at your RGB, it just basically fills in the matte area. So the area that's matted in here, it comes in here and basically overs it. So you can see the sun is adding more of a flare around here, and you can color correct this. Very important. You will want to color correct the sunlight color. It's not going to be white, it'll be more of a yellow. So you can see I've added a little bit of color of yellow here. So this is the sparkles. If I go ahead and merge that on, I'm not going to show that. It's basically adds like a little bit of a sparkling or lens flare or whatever. You can add lens flares, but don't ever go overboard with it. And voila, we come to the end with the merge node. And there is Jack in all his glory, and a lot of that edge work has been taken care of by our actual setup. Is there work needed to be done here? Yes. You can see we have some artifacts here that are red here. We've got the chin here that's gone ballistic. One of the reasons that might be is because we need to desaturate more of the edge here, right? So we talked about that before, right? What is the whole purpose of this? The whole purpose of this is so that by the time you get to the plussing of your actual edge blending, you don't have any saturated edges because you can see what it's doing. It's compounding the color information overboard here. So if we go back here to our saturation, this whole color here with the red is something that is cool, but it's causing issues in regards to the scene. So one of the things you can do is, for the heck of it, I mean, let's go back to our edge despill here. And what if we were to kind of lessen this a little bit? Let's turn all that off, right? We'll leave the green in there. And let's go back and see. Again, you can desaturate it here. You could use these grades to kind of get that area and desaturate the red in the background plate here, or in the despill area, I should say. And now if I come over here to the over, voila, we don't have that issue. We still might need to do some work here as far as dealing with this green edge on here and so forth. And also maybe color correcting this area. It just doesn't make any sense with the background, which would require some masking and color correction work over here. Okay. Or maybe in your despill, doesn't matter. I've also added this little shuffle/contact sheet. So if you put your viewer to it, I talked about before, you can cross compare the two together. Obviously I need some work here. work here. Check to see that your alpha is not bleeding through here. Maybe you might have to do some roto paint work. Again, we're going to cover that in the extra episode. There's some work here that's needed. We have, issue here. Maybe we need to blend this nose in a little bit better. This is highlight too blown out. Again, the Blackmagic 4K has terrible dynamic range compared to what it is, but you can see from the original plate, there's no big difference. In regards to what was handed to us versus what we have. We didn't degrade or break the color correction. It's just bad in general. The original image is bad. There is a slighter different gradient, so there's that gradient here. So the light wraps and so forth might be an issue that might be masked out or dealt with. But in general, you can see we have a pretty good result just off the bat. And again, I did this all at frame 26. I'm not going to go through this entire video. I will in future videos to animate rotos, but for this demonstration, this is a quick way through the Uber tutorial. I do have a template in the folder that comes with this whole package you can get off my website that you can start with. It's a beautiful template. It's a great place to start, and will have you running as a pro in no time.